Support the Amigos podcast and keep the Amiga goodness flowing for just $1 a month. Visit our page at patreon.com/AmigosPodcast.
Amiga, the first personal computer that gives you a creative edge.
Amigos, the podcast about everything Amiga. Amigos is a proud member of the Throwback Network, your home for quality retro podcasts. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron Dowdy and John Bodovkar Schaller.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome to Amigos. I'm John.
And I'm Aaron.
And today we are going to talk about James Pond 2. But before we do, we are going to it's a very special episode. I'm just going to tease this before we start our episode proper. Stay tuned to the end of the episode. We have quite a few Amiga Christmas memories that our listeners have sent in to us, and I'm really looking forward to listening to those. And I actually haven't listened. I'm saving them for the podcast.
Beauty.
I haven't heard them yet, but I know that they're going to be great. I also have something a little special for Aaron because it's Christmas. Got him a little Christmas gift.
No, Bode. Good Lord. Every time with this stuff.
So he's going to open it live on air. You don't have to
Actually, I brought something for you, but it's not wrapped. So I'll swap it over, too. Because I can't wrap this well. But thank you, whatever this is. Bode's a generous, giving fellow, folks. What in the hell is this? It's a framed picture of...
So that is a signed
All right, I see
alternate
that.
history of Q*bert that was signed by, what's his name, Jeff Dyer?
Jeff Lee.
Jeff Lee, that's right. And that is the designer of Q*bert. I picked that up in my travels, and it's part of a series. And
you picked this up in your travels to where?
Well,
Oz?
I went to Chicago last week, and I stopped by the Galloping Ghost Arcade. And they had those for sale, and I thought, boy, giving your near insatiable appetite for 20s era drugs,
no kidding,
imbibing some absinthe.
That's that explains. That makes it, folks. If you can see this, Q*bert he looks very depressed, and he's got his nose resting on what appears to be a bar, and there's a drink beside him, and a weird looking spoon and some sugar cubes, and there's a green fairy coming out of the glass. So. I'm glad you explained this to me because I was wondering what the hell this was. Well, thank you, Bode. Here, hold on a second. I'm going to grab yours real quick. You entertain the troops.
Okay. And so, I'll talk a little bit about my trip to the Galloping Ghost. It was a fantastic experience. The Galloping Ghost is outside of Chicago, about 30 minutes outside of downtown. They just have they don't have every classic game, but they had everything that I wanted to play. They had, for example, some of the games that I'd never gotten a chance to play that I got a chance to play were Tapper, that in a dedicated cabinet.
Was it root beer Tapper or the Budweiser? Oh, snap.
Budweiser Tapper. We got, they had Timber, which I'd never gotten a chance to play in the dedicated cabinet, which is featuring the same character as the Tapper, but he's chopping down trees.
He gets around.
Yeah. They had and now the name is going to escape me, but you can help me. They had that holographic fighting game.
Coliseum?
Yeah, Coliseum. They had one of those there. I got to play. What else? They had...
Did they have any lasers up there, stuff from Coliseum? Did they have Vegas Battle or Cliffhanger, the Dragon's Lair?
Oh, no. I think we're thinking about different things. I'm not talking about a Laserdisc game. I'm talking about the fighting game is projected.
Right. But I think that ran off a Laserdisc, I think.
It might have. But they did have other Laserdisc games there. They had a Dragon's Lair. Unfortunately, their Dragon's Lair 2 and Space Ace were down, but that is not an uncommon thing with the Laserdisc games.
Yeah.
One thing that I was really impressed with at Galloping Ghost was the percentage of games that were up. I'd say 95% of the games, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of games, were up. I got to play original Circus, which I never got to play in a dedicated cabinet. Got to play Gravatar, which was great.
They have a good selection of Vector stuff.
They did. Did
they have Zookeeper?
They had a Zookeeper.
Oh, and you don't see that in a dedicated cab.
Yeah, and I've got pictures of all this stuff, and I'll put them up on the blog.
Mr. Do?
They had a Mr. Do.
Did they have Mr. Do's Castle?
They did not.
Did they have Do Run Run?
They did not.
Oh, sorry,
but they. I talked to the employee that was working there. and he said that they are getting ready to take over because they're in kind of it's not a strip mall, but they're in kind of a block of shops, and they're getting ready to take over the next shop over. They've already taken over 2 of them, and they're going to knock down the wall, and they've got 400 more games they're going to put in. So they were very, very nice. It's very reasonable, $15 for all you can play.
For all day?
All day.
Holy
all
Lord.
Day.
I would lose my mind in there.
You can keep your receipt. You can go out and come back in. Just keep your receipt.
Nice.
They had a great selection of snacks and other things, video game memorabilia, the poster set. So if you're in the Chicagoland area, I highly recommend the Galloping Ghost Arcade.
I was very jealous of your pictures. I was like, oh my God.
I immediately sent Aaron all kinds of pictures.
Yeah, it was killing me. I'm not going to badmouth Chicago. I love Chicago, but it's tough to go into Chicago to go to this. That's the one. I wish it was. I mean, it's pretty much in the middle of Chicago, isn't it?
No, it's outside the city. It's in a suburb of Chicago.
I see. Okay, yeah. Well, I would love to visit it. I love to visit with a big arcade just because it's been so long since I was in a proper arcade. Mm-hmm. Aside from the one I own or the several that are around here that are home owned, but still the vibe's a lot different when you go to a proper arcade.
Oh yeah, you get that sound, and when you play these dedicated machines and you hear those huge speakers that are in there just blasting right in your face off, it's awesome.
Well, since Boat gave me this awesome picture, now really I had 2 things for you, but unfortunately due to someone's slothery, one of them didn't get here, but I will explain what it is. This I saw just because I know you love NES cartridges and Nintendo games, and so I picked this up for you. You don't have this one because you have to just have a look at it. You may have seen it before, but I saw it and I thought of you.
Drunk Hunt Entertainment Flask.
Yeah, that's a booze flask in the shape of an NES cartridge.
Now that is awesome.
I saw that and I was like, that looks like Boat.
And this will accompany me to many holiday parties.
Yeah. Now, here's the better news. And I'm hoping maybe by the end of the year we can do a little special show. I have finally acquired an Amiga 500, like a 520 video out for your Amiga. And so this should have been here by now, but it's not. And so as soon as this thing comes in, we should have a complete Amiga 500 for you, and then we can actually delve into the massive crate of games that you've had sitting over in your garage for the past several months.
All right.
So, but yes, everything, finally the plan has come together. I was able to procure one at a ludicrous price, but a price that I could afford, but never blow this up, Boat, under any circumstances,
Okay.
or we're all screwed. So hopefully there'll be a inaugural Amigos Getting an Amiga podcast, and then Bo can share his own Christmas memories in a year.
I'll create my own Christmas memory once we get that going. I am so ready because I've got the table. Right now it's got an Atari 8-bit on it, but I'm ready to move that to a different location and make that the dedicated Amiga.
Beautiful.
We got some feedback from last week.
Oh, dear.
Paul Kitching wrote in, and he said, I'm from England, and I'd never heard of Chupa Chups before Zool was released. I said Chupa Chups were from England. I don't know why I said that. I just, in my mind, I thought they were too. Thing.
I thought they were.
So, but they are not. They are actually Spanish. I looked that up, and which I guess Salvador Dali, maybe he was from Spain.
2 + 2 is 4. Honestly, I thought they were British. I'm just like you.
Yeah. So, but he said the only time that he'd ever had one was when they included it on an Amiga magazine. Instead of a cover disc, you got a Chupa Chup.
They put a lolly on there.
Yeah. So, thank you, Paul, for setting us straight on that.
Yeah. Sorry.
Jonas wrote in. He's from O'Brien's Retro and Vintage.
Right, we love them.
Yeah, and he said, many, many thanks for making such a great podcast. I listened to all your episodes and can't wait until the next one is out. It has become one of the computer highlights of the week for me. It's almost the feeling I had when buying games and computer magazines in the 90s, eagerly awaiting the next issue to be released. Keep up the good work.
Well, that's awful nice.
Of course, I just read that just to feed our ego. So thank you.
No, but I mean, we appreciate that. That's awful nice. I'm glad we provide someone with some joy.
And that's kind of the way that I view this podcast too. Is that it's every week I discover a game that I've never played before because I'm new to the platform, and it's awesome. I love doing it. Now let's see. This is actually I think I might have pasted that right in the middle of Paul's message, because Paul's message continues on. He's got more to say. He says, regarding the Amiga, listen to this. His A500 is a Kickstart 1.2 with the Commodore key on the left.
All right.
And all of his friends that had Amigas also had that configuration. So he thinks of the 1.3 as the odd one out, and the 1.2 is the proper one.
Well, again, us being in the U.S., I don't know anyone that had a 1.2. When I got my 1000, obviously I had nothing, but the Kickstart disc that I had was handed to me when I bought it was a 1.3. Now, I had acquired a 1.2 later on, but maybe we were tardy to the party on that. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, the 1.2, I feel bad for those guys. I'm sure they upgraded pretty quick.
Yeah. So if you are actually, any of our other UK listeners, because I know that we've got some more out there, Rolling in the Caves, Dreamcatcher, you let us know if you had no A500, if you were in the same boat as Paul. Speaking of Dreamcatcher, he wrote in with a defense of Cloanto. He says that Cloanto, those folks did talk to the rights holders of the games that they include and got permission to include them on there, that they just include the cracked versions just because it's easier. But they did get their permission from the original rights.
It is
holders.
odd, though.
Now, he said, he prefaced this with, "It is my understanding," or something to that degree. So it wasn't the official word, but I guess he'd read that from someone over at Cloanto. And he said that might have been part of the reason why I couldn't get Dragon's Lair to work, was because it was never properly cracked, and that it was doing weird things that the higher editions than the value edition would provide. If that's the case, that's fine, but I still think it's a little bit weird to load up an officially licensed product and have a bunch of unofficially licensed titles.
The only thing I can think of that would make any sense in that, again, I don't speak for Cloanto. And Cloanto, to the best of my knowledge, has always been a good partner of the community. So I will say that. That much said, the only reason I can think that you would include a cracked version of a game is if there's some sort of manual check that we can't get past as a consumer, or something that would make the game unusable in a normal form. It is strange. It seems sort of unprofessional to have a crack. Don't get me wrong. I was a dirty, rotten, stinking, filthy pirate myself back in the day. That much said, it seems odd that a commercial product would come out and the first thing you'd see when you load up a game is a weird crack screen. It's also strange to me that even in the basic form, that the product you purchase will not run something that you could run with the free version of WinUAE. That seems odd. So don't know. Yeah. I'm looking into the whole Cloanto thing. I'm actually talking with a fellow about that. So we may, somewhere down the road, we may have a good hard look at one of their packages and go through it.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds like a great...
In the interest of fairness, if anything, but it's for some people the Cloanto pack is really the only way they're going to get to experience an Amiga.
Right. And I want to give the guys the benefit of the doubt.
Sure, but it is. Hey, I'm with you though. The things you experience are oddball to me. Yeah. That doesn't seem like a professional way to go.
Yeah. So. And last but not least, we have Rob O'Hara. Flack sent in this little news tidbit. You may know Flack from his work on the Sprite Castle C64 podcast, or you don't know Flack.
I love this last episode on his IBM PC history. That was the last one I heard anyway. It was quite good. So, I love Flack. He
wrote in and said that we should check out this Amiga 500 emulator that runs within the Chrome browser. And so I did. You download it from the Chrome web store, and you run it, and it loads up an Amiga desktop. It's really quite impressive, what can be done within a browser these days. They do upsell you. If you want to use your own ADF files, it's 99 cents. But considering this is Cloanto again, considering they charge you, $10 for the cheapest version of Amiga Forever. If all you want to do is jump in there and play some games in your browser, $1 is not a whole lot of money.
What? Now I saw this. I linked it even, but I didn't actually check it out. The browser version is. Can you change Kickstart ROMs? What can you do with it exactly? Can you mount?
I don't think so. I think it's only 1.3. But
can you dock to the Amiga up to your different processors to give you the options that a UAE does? Or
I don't think so. I think it's very simple. It boots up an Amiga desktop, and you can run the various demos that came with the Amiga. And if you want to add ADF files, I didn't pay the $1 but I assume that there's a way that you drag and drop a file into there or something, and that allows you to do that. But yeah, it was really cool. I ran the Juggler demo, I ran the Boing demo, and it worked.
Did it seem like it ran pretty well? It
did. It ran very smoothly, and I hope that this allows for things. I'm all about the I think that we're going to see more and more browser-based things in the future. Everything is heading that way, for good or for ill. And I would love to have be able to fire up an NES emulator at work, or anything like that. And since it's just running through the browser, you don't have to deal with a lot of the limitations that you do when you're on a work computer, normally.
Well, with HTML5 becoming more predominant in the fact that Chrome they've got a lot of stuff mixed into that browser. I'm not surprised, and I think it's neat, and it's a tribute to the popularity of the Amiga that someone would take the time to even do something like that.
Yeah,
and that got a lot of airplay, because I heard about it on a bunch of different sites. People were talking about it, and not just Amiga sites. So people still remember. People are still interested. It's nice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You got any more news, Aaron?
You covered it, man.
All right. Well, let's jump in to James Pond 2.
Ooh.
So James Pond 2, codename Robocod, also known as Super James Pond, has many names.
Yeah.
It's a sequel to the original James Pond. What can you tell us about the developer?
Well, they didn't do much aside from the Pond series. The developer was called Vector Dean Limited. They did James Ponds, all those. They did a game called Bad Company, which I'm not familiar with. They did another game which is interesting to me. It's a sound that's interesting. It's called Aquatic Games, featuring James Pond and the Aquabits, or Aquabats, I should say. And I don't know what that is, but I don't know. That sounds like an old Mystery Science Theater short. And so that would be interesting to see. I didn't, there was very little on these guys. I don't know if this was just the same team just doing everything, and it was their outfit. I'm assuming that's what it was. It was probably like a developer of like 4 guys, basically. Because if you look at who worked in this game, they pretty much did, with the exception of the fellow that did the music, they didn't do much else aside from these games that were mentioned, Aquatic Games and Bad Company, the James Bond series.
Yeah. This also falls into the tradition of platformers for the Amiga that had a product tie-in. If you watch,
it's weird. I don't ever think about that, but it's the Amiga. They had the handout, man.
Yeah.
These guys wanted the money.
Yeah. If you watch the intro of the game, you can see that there are penguins that our character James is rescuing, and they actually are turned into biscuits. And as we all know, biscuits are not biscuits the way that we think of them in America, but more like the way we think about cookies.
This game is very British.
Yeah, it's and it is. I guess this company, or this game, was sponsored by the McVitie's Biscuit Company. And it is, and penguin biscuits were a kind of biscuit that you could get. Now the earlier or later ports of this game dropped that product tie-in, but they are, and actually they're replaced by Santa's elves rather than penguins, which fits the story of the game.
I was wondering about that, because I wonder what versions. Of course, the version I put on the Amiga, it had the penguins. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the Amiga ever got an elves version, or those were on the consoles, perhaps.
Well,
because I tried to find out, and I couldn't find it anywhere.
A lot of these ports came way after. This came out in '91. This game was ported to the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation in 2003.
Yeah, on the PlayStation Network. I could not believe how many places this was ported. Mm-hmm. It was it was baffling.
Yeah, Game Boy Advance and PlayStation in 2003, the Nintendo DS in 2005, PS2 in 2006, and the PlayStation Network in 2009.
And on top of the fact that it was released in the Atari ST, the Genesis,
right,
the C64, the Archimedes, DOS, Game Gear. You're like, I think it got ported more than Zool. And when you think of big platforms that came off the Amiga, the ones I think of are Zool and maybe Shadow of the Beast, something like that. But James Pond 2, it would never have occurred to me that it was ported this much.
It could just be one of those things where it was huge overseas. It was huge in England.
McVitie's,
everybody's got them.
They're good eating, I guess. Hopefully they're still around.
Which reminds me, it's going off the reservation, but the chocolate orange. Are you familiar with the chocolate orange?
Yes, yeah, I know, yeah.
That is a British thing, and but they closed down the factory, the chocolate orange factory.
Oh no!
Yeah, and now they're being made in like Poland or someplace, where it's cheaper.
Oh jeez, they're good eating too.
Yeah,
that's too bad.
I like a good chocolate orange around Christmas time.
I don't think the last time I've seen one of those. It's been forever.
Yeah, I get them at Michael's.
Oh,
that's the chocolate orange capital of
You mean
the
drugstore?
No, Michael's the
art store,
the craft store.
Oh, sure, that makes much more sense. Get them at an art supply store.
All right, back to James Pond. So the apparently, according to the official canon, the game takes place immediately after its predecessor. So Dr. Maybe, who is the main antagonist, he has retreated to the North Pole, and he's taken over Santa's workshop. So that is why we're doing this game this week. This is why O'Brien's Retro and Vintage has suggested that we do this game. Basically, Dr. Maybe has turned Santa's helpers into evil minions. And James Pond has to go in there and, free the penguins that have been taken captive, retrieve the stolen toys for the children of the world, and defeat Dr. Maybe once and for all. Maybe.
The developers of this game really liked puns.
Yeah,
and they, ponder this for a moment. When you said that we had been requested, so this is a fish. I'm assuming this fish game solely exists because of the pun from James Bond.
Mm-hmm. There's a second pond layered, or a second pond layered onto it.
They've got to add more puns about RoboCop.
Yep.
So they had to put that in there. Then had they said, what does a robotic fish James Bond need to do? A Christmas adventure. What the hell? So let's do that. This is the weird amalgamation of a drug-induced ride I've ever seen. And this got published. It was very popular. It's baffling to me. The story's baffling.
And so, you basically, the story is you start out the Santa's Toy Factory, and you go through all these different levels. There's secret stages. There's actually 50 levels in total. I did not see all 50 levels myself.
No.
This part of the Robocod suit enables him to, when you press the button, it's a very odd power. You are able to stretch your torso to what appears to be an infinite distance. I mean, you never run out of space. You only run out until you hit the ceiling. That was when I tried it. That was as far as I could go.
It is odd, but I have to say, it's actually a neat play mechanic.
It is. It reminded me kind of like Bionic Commando or something like that.
You know what it reminded me of? Because you have to be clever the way you stretch sometimes, but there's bad guys. Parts of it reminded me of Anteater. Remember in Anteater, you've got that big long tongue, and you got to get a whip back in before the bad guys whack you. Mm-hmm. I guess they could have just had it's sort of the equivalent of throwing a rope with a grappling hook and just shimmying up, but it's so wacky.
It is.
And this game is so wacky that stretching your torso like that, sure, what the heck? It fits right in. And the look on dude's face when he does it is wacky, just like, brr.
And there's a couple other things that I thought were kind of neat in this game that I've never seen on any other game, like the way that your lives are presented. Instead of just having a 3 with a little man symbol underneath it, you've got a portrait of James himself holding up fingers for however many lives you have left. And the fewer lives you have, the more his expression twists into this grimace, this Gollum-like, horrible grimace. And so that was neat. I liked the, this is another Zool-like thing where there's just a billion different kinds of things you can collect through the levels that give you points.
It wasn't as bad as Zool, but it was, at the very first level, you just collect stuff for a full minute before you see anyone. I was like, is this thing screwed up? Where are the bad guys? I'm just collecting junk.
And at the end of the level, it was weird. At the end of the very first level, and I don't know if I did this right or not, but I got this. There was this car that jumped out.
Yes.
And then I rode the car back to the beginning of the level, and then I was done.
I'm glad I wasn't the only one, because I went through the level and I got everything you could do, and I just stood there like, and I had gotten the car and jumped out of it, so the car was just sort of driving around, and I jumped back in it, and I was like, what the hell am I doing with this car? And so I was like, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning. I didn't know why, and then the level just ended. I was like, okay, then.
All right.
I got you. Sounds good.
I was just happy because I actually finished a level in Amiga platformer, because that rarely happens.
You know, I will say this. Much like a lot of these platformers we had a look at, someone had played Mario and thought, hey, me too, because this had mystery boxes aplenty. Now, they mixed it up a little bit. They'd have the poison come out, or bad guys would come out.
And what was odd, I thought, was that, the mystery box, when you hit it, you're stopped and you go back down. But then instead of having to kind of jump around the place where the box had been, you can jump right through it once it's been activated.
And they had different sizes of mystery box. Because like I said, when you said the car came out, I know planes can come out and stuff. I didn't get far enough to see a plane. But wacky. It was very strange. But they, and there was the backgrounds had that sort of. It's basically a static picture that was just kind of scrolled.
Parallax scrolling.
Well, it was, but it was one big picture. We played another game that did that too, where it was just.
Adam's Family did that a little bit,
where it would show one big picture in the back, and you would kind of scroll on its own as you went through. That's an okay effect.
Yeah.
It's not great. The graphics on this are not what I would call spectacular.
No.
I mean, they had some nice flourishes and touches.
But I mean, this is 91. We're getting out around the time that the heavy hitters started to appear on the 16-bit platforms.
Right.
The Amiga had a 5 or 6 year stretch where they were all by themselves, and everything that they did looked spectacular.
Yeah, this, by comparison, it looked a little, it was underwhelming, I guess is the best way to put it.
And there was an AGA version of this game,
which I tried to get it to work, and I had trouble getting this to run on my Amiga, to be completely honest with you. I don't know if I just had bad versions. I ended up having to play this on my Xbox.
Yeah, I don't know what made the AGA version special, but it does exist.
I'd like to have tried the CD32 version, which apparently this is one of the first games to come out in the CD32. I have a CD32. I don't have this game. I would hope that it would have a separate button for jump. Yeah. And this is another one of those, Boat's favorites, where you have to point up for jump. And that's a pain on this one. It was a little harder than it's been on the other ones. I would have liked to have had a button. And something else that Robocod did that annoyed me, it's one of those games where after you stop, your guy sort of scoots to the whichever, then with momentum. And I fought the controller in this. It wasn't as bad as Super Frog, but it wasn't in the same ballpark as, say, Adam's Family, where you had really good control.
Right,
this was
not as tight.
Somewhere in the middle.
Actually, we should take a look at that CD32 version sometime, because when EGM reviewed the game, they said that there is a quote extremely pixelated full motion video intro.
I had read that, and I was very excited to see that. There were some intros on the CD32 that required the MPEG card, but if this one was really pixelated, I'm guessing this one didn't require it. It wasn't very good. But I'd like to see. Like I said, I tried like gangbusters to get my 1200 to run the CD32 version, and it wasn't happening for whatever reason. So I don't know.
Yeah. That it scored pretty well in some magazines. The K magazine, I guess it's called Ace, gave the Amiga version a score of 934 out of 1,000, which I just really it pleases me to no end that it was at one time a magazine that had a 1,000-point rating scale.
I wonder how they came up with that.
934 out of 1,000, not 935.
They couldn't just knock a couple of digits off that.
And they a lot of the ports did not review as well as the Amiga version, which is the case with Sword of Sodan and a lot of the other games. They had to make a lot of cuts when they were doing that. But yeah, that's what I've got. I guess the ST version scored pretty well. What do you have? Do you have any other kind of?
Well, the one thing, it's a one disc game, which is they pack a lot on, right? The guy that programmed it and developed it, I had to look at him. Let me pull up the feller's name here. Chris Sorrell, right? he did, again, much like this company, which I'm guessing these guys may be connected with the developer and this fellow. He did the coding, he co-coded it, co-designed it, and he did the James Pond series and not much else. A couple things. The person that did, I didn't think the music was all that special in this. I don't know what you thought about it. They had the fellow's name was Richard Joseph. He actually did some decent stuff. Chaos Engine. He did Cannon Fodder. He did all the James Ponds, and he did Rise of the Robots, which was I don't know if you remember this.
Terrible.
Yeah, it was horrible. But he also did Sensible Soccer. So he had a certain pedigree, and I guess there just wasn't much room for show off any chops. I'd heard that the opening, the theme of this is like a takeoff on the RoboCop theme, which who knows what, I don't know what the heck the RoboCop theme is. Maybe
it's not exactly on the level of the Star Wars theme.
Yeah, right. I looked this up on eBay, as I want to do, to see what kind of action you could get off of it. Now, I looked up the Amiga version. Of course, this was out on everything, and so I don't know how hard it's going to be to find that on Genesis or whatever. I'm not sure I've ever seen one of these cartridges for the Genesis. Do you?
Boy, I think that I've seen the Super Nintendo version somewhere. It's called Super James Pond.
And I guess there's Game Boy versions. But everything was released for those.
Yeah.
eBay, plentiful in box. You're looking at, in U.S. dollars, you're looking at $15 to $30 all day long in the U.S. I saw some overseas. Australia, you can get you a little something. I saw it down there. I saw it in the U.K., Germany. Plenty of these to go around. So apparently, obviously, this must have sold pretty well because it's still easy to get hold of. I did notice, and this is for our fans in the U.S., I noticed that if you have the PAL version of this, you can actually use the cheat screen in this to change it over to NTSC. I haven't got a chance to test this yet, but I'm gonna give it a go and see if that will help me. But that's handy. I wish all the games would would have an option to do that. But overall, I didn't get real far, and I tried. I got frustrated with the actual accuracy of the controls. That was my biggest problem. Really, I kind of liked the concept. I liked the way the levels worked, where you had to rescue all the penguins before you could leave. The enemies, I mean, in some ways, this is sort of plain Jane. Not the cut on the game, because I know a lot of people really like it. I'm not killing the game, but I mean, it was a rehash of Mario gameplay in a lot of ways. The vehicles was interesting, the ones I found. The bad guys, I didn't see anything that was particularly incredible. I didn't get real far though. They might get better, but I didn't think this was anything special. I thought it was average game.
And once again, the spikes, the spikes just kill you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another thing that was weird about it was the fact that so often you were required to take a blind leap.
Yeah.
And there are clever ways you can do it. You can sort of, but I mean, something else about this is when you use your Robocod powers. You can't Robocod up through platforms or down through them, so you really can't use it and you can't do it midair. That would have been an awesome addition, because then you could have jumped in midair, Robocod it up, grabbed the roof, and then stretched down to see what the heck was under you before you just leapt off into the space. I mean, I guess you have to memorize a lot of the level layout, which that takes away from the fun. One thing about these games, and we've said it before, Zool and this one and Super Fox, if they didn't really take good game level design into account on a lot of these, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that would have went a long way, because I like the concept of having the stretching ability. I think there's a lot of action that you could have used to play with that and made it a lot more fun. But I'll go back to it, and once I get better at it, maybe I'll have a different opinion. But like I said, to me, it seemed a little slightly above average. There were some flourishes, but overall an average game.
Yeah. Well, it's time for the scores.
Well, I'm not confident, Boat, because you're a lot better at these games than me. But I'll go ahead and go first.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to say, I know this isn't a great score, but the best I could come up with was 362,300 points.
You beat me by a lot. 199,600.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then you must be really bad at this
I was
game.
terrible.
Bo, because that's pitiful. That's pitiful.
Well then, so this concludes our talk.
Finally,
congratulations!
I beat Bo to the platformer.
We are going to next week. We're going to do Cannon Fodder. It's a game that needs no introduction.
I've never played Cannon Fodder, so I've never owned it. I've never had it, and so I'm looking forward to giving it a shot. I know it's got a lot of fans. Again, another game that was on a lot of systems.
I played it on the on Windows 3.1 back in the day, but I'm really looking forward to playing it, the Amiga version, the original, and probably still the best. Now it's time to get into our Amiga Christmas Memories section.
I can't wait for this.
And so we're going to start with Aaron.
Oh, you want my memories?
I want your memories.
Well, I don't have any Amiga Christmas memories per se. However, I do.
You can do a retro computing memory.
When I brought this whole situation up, I told both this. I was driving around in the car. I drive a lot in my job, and I was thinking about my 1200, where it came from, and I got it from a fellow named Larry. I think I've mentioned him before. Larry was a good friend of mine that back when I had just got out of high school. He was an Amiga guy. We used to get together and have big, huge copy parties, just the two of us. But I remember coming. He lived right down the road from me, and I would come over to his house, and I'd go in and see his wife, and she'd know who I was, and he's downstairs, and I'd go in, and the lights would all be off, and I'd have to feel my way down to the basement, and I'd hear the music playing. It was usually some Pink Floyd, and Larry would have 3 Amigas and maybe a PC going, and they'd all be running Fractals. If you remember, these were a big deal back in the day. And we would come down. I would come down there and greet him, and we'd just kick back and chat and watch these Fractals. And it was very peaceful. And Larry was always a good guy to me. I'd go over to swap software, but we basically were just chatting, and we both loved it. We loved the computer. The Amiga was fun. It was a fun time to be into computers back in the day. It seemed simpler. You know, of course, that was before I had a family and responsibilities and to earn money, so I could just sit there and not have as many cares. But it was a beautiful time, and it was always fun to get new goodies and chat with your friend. We used to swap a lot of mod files. That was one of our things, and so it was always neat to fire up the mod player and listen to this new music we'd managed to get hold of. Great memories I have. Larry got sick, and his family moved from their house in Hurricane. This is just a few years ago, and I got a phone call, and it was his son, who was a real good friend of mine, who was asking me, if I was still into the Amiga scene, and would I like to come over and pick up all the computer stuff, because if I didn't take it, I'd just go throw it out. And they had the 1200 that I picked up. They had the 500 that Boat's got now in that mix, and some C64s. And they just gave them to me. And he said, Larry wanted you to have them because he knew you would appreciate them. And he's right. I appreciate the hell out of them and still do. And I think Boat will appreciate his. And, and Larry actually has gotten a little bit better. And hopefully one of these days maybe I'll do a quick telephone interview with him. He was around the Amiga scene a lot longer than I was back in the day, and he's probably got some good stories. But I never forgot that. It's very touching when someone reaches out, because we'd lost touch over the years, and it was neat that he remembered me and the times we used to have from back in the day, and was kind enough to set me up. And without Larry, there would absolutely probably, Boat may do it, but I would not be involved in any sort of Amiga scene or Amiga podcast, because I would be out of the game. So, I appreciate it. It's a pleasant memory I have of the old fella.
All right. Well, I guess I'll share my memory next. My memory is not about the Amiga, because I did not have an Amiga growing up. I didn't even know what an Amiga was, because I was just living in another world. I was living in the 8-bit world. When I was probably, 6 or 7, my dad bought us an Atari 1200 XL, which is the, if you have any of the Atari machines, the 1200 XL is the most obscure of all the released Atari 8-bit computers. But it was my first computer, and my favorite computer Christmas memory was every year Atari would send us a software catalog. And I guess it must have been Atari, because all of their games, if you're familiar with the carts, they all look the same. They were third-party carts.
Yeah.
But
horrible.
Yeah.
Brown.
And but I would look at it, and I would look at the titles like 3D Tic-Tac-Toe. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking about the Star Wars chess, and I'm thinking, well, this is just going to be just like that. I'm going to get that. Basketball, and they wouldn't have any screenshots in this catalog. It was just all in your mind, and it would talk about experience the thrill of 2-on-2 basketball. And of course they were talking about having an Atari 800, which had 4 joystick parts. I only had 2. But just the way that video games used to be marketed, and this goes with the 2600 too, is that so much of the action had to take place in your mind.
I think that's why the box art was so beautiful, right?
Yeah. And so I still remember looking through those catalogs and reading those descriptions over and over again before I made my selections. And I can tell you, unfortunately, that 3D Tic-Tac-Toe is very little to do with the three-dimensional Star Wars chess played on the Millennium Falcon.
Just a few years early for that.
Yeah.
Now, is the 800 or is the Amiga or the Atari you've got right here? Is this the same one?
It is the exact same system. It is the only system that I had. Well, I guess it's not. I have a couple other systems that are originally the ones that I had, but this is the actual. I've had to retrace the connections on the keyboard several times to keep it working, but it still fires up and works like a charm.
You can't see it, folks, but I'm looking over at Boat's set up here, and he's got his 800 set up. He's got his 1200 XL. He's got his joystick set up. He's got everything set to go. It's like a little tribute zone over here.
Yeah.
And I've played on this thing. I'm a big 800 and 1200. I have what do I have, Bo? I've got a 400, and I've got the
XEGS.
the XEGS at the house. I was also late to the party on the Atari, but I've come over here and played Boats, and have a lot of fun. Hey, you can't go wrong with the old stuff.
It's a great
stuff.
little system for sure.
What's the toilet paper for?
The toilet paper that's a good question.
There's a roll of toilet paper beside it. This is not casting the Atari in good light.
It's to dry my tears when I cannot, beat my score.
Is that what that's for? You better get a new roll.
I've also got some trombone mutes sitting over there.
I was wondering about that.
It's a table that serves many functions.
I see that.
But anyway, that's the. I might take a picture of the old Atari since it is going to be moved soon to make way for the Amiga.
Ooh, huzzah!
Yeah. All right, and now we're going to listen to a couple of our listener stories. So take it away, listeners. Our first memory comes from Paul Shaw from Melbourne, Australia. Take it away, Paul.
Hi guys, this is Paul Shaw from Melbourne, Australia. My most memorable Amiga Christmas was the year 1992, and I remember in December of that year walking into my local newsagent to see if they had the new edition of Amiga format. And I walked in, and sure enough, there it was, and right on the front cover in massive lettering. I couldn't believe it. There was 2 new Amigas out. There was the amazing Amiga 4000, and then there was also the Amiga 1200. So 2 machines out at roughly the same time, and this is the first I'd ever heard of them, and both reviewed in that magazine. So this was such big news because for a long time Amiga fans had been waiting for a new machine, particularly the entry-level models, where there hadn't been much since the Amiga 500. It was the biggest news for the entry-level since that time. So there you go. My most memorable Amiga Christmas was 1992. So have a good Christmas, everyone. Bye.
Our next memory comes from Chicagoland's own Sean Courtney from the Pie Factory podcast.
Aaron, John, happy Christmas. This is Sean from the Pie Factory podcast and a couple of other side things I do here and there. And first off, thank you to John Boat of Karschaller for having me on the Amigos podcast recently. I really enjoyed our little chat, When I heard that you guys were going to be taking some submissions for your Amiga Christmas special, I guess, not that every other episode of Amigos is not special, of course, I kind of struggled over what to say because, well, I don't really have any Christmas-specific memories about the Amiga or Amiga-specific memories about Christmas. And when I think about it, I got into the Amiga around 1993, and right about then is when it wasn't easy to find Amiga stuff out in the wild. You had to do it all through mail order. And that might be why I never really have any Amiga-specific Christmas memories. I never got any Amiga-related Christmas presents, except in 2003, I got a gift certificate from an in-law for a place called Software Hut. You guys might remember that, maybe you don't, but Software Hut, they were based out of Westchester, Pennsylvania, and they were the main Amiga dealer in the United States. No, I think they really started being the main Amiga dealer probably like around the mid to late 90s, and eventually they moved to Exton, Pennsylvania, but that's neither here nor there. So my wife told everybody, Software Hut gift certificate, Software Hut gift certificate. So that's what I have to say about that. I've actually been to Software Hut a couple of times. I used to live in New Jersey for about 8 years before I moved back to Chicago. And there were a couple of times when I actually went to Software Hut for various unfortunate circumstances. Mainly my PowerPC accelerators kept dying. And while I was there, I saw they had the most amazing setup in their workshop. They had like aisles and aisles and aisles full of every Amiga thing you'd ever heard of, including stuff you've never heard of, such as hardware for information kiosks that it just wasn't well known were Amiga powered. I have a lot of great memories about the Amiga, but again, not so much Christmas related. I remember, of course, getting my first Amiga, which was an Amiga 600. I had been using a Commodore 64C for about 5 years at the time. After using the Commodore 64 for so long, and then connecting the Amiga and powering it up to Robocop 3D, which was one of the software titles included, my little mind was blown sky high. I could hardly talk. Man, going from 8-bit to 16 bits, it's quite a culture shock, I guess, even though I don't really see 8 to 16-bit as a culture, I guess, but you know what I mean. I remember the BBS scene in the early 90s. That's basically how I met a lot of Amiga friends, most of whom, if not all of whom, pretty much dropped off the face of the earth by now. But that was some good times, meeting people in person, having swap parties of excuse me. Yeah, sorry about that. I think I'm coming down with something. So anyway. Here's something that I should mention. Now, I had mentioned when I talked with you, John, that when I was in college, I took I don't know what the heck they called it, but it was a course in which it was basically a video toaster course. I was a journalism major. I started as computer science. For various reasons, I switched to journalism. And most of the computers in the journalism department were Amigas. There were Amiga 500s for, say, the print journalism classes. There was an Amiga 2000 in the TV production studio, which had a video toaster, of course. And I know one of the professors had an Amiga 3000 in her office. But naturally, because I was such an Amiga person, I had to take the video toaster class just so that I could get college credit for futzing around with an Amiga. And against my will, I had to take a TV production class to meet my credits. Funny story, on the first day of class, when we were kind of going around the room introducing ourselves, I said to the professor, I said, look, Rick, I have nothing against you. You're a good guy. I like you and everything, and I have nothing against any of my classmates here, but I do not want to be here. And he laughed and thanked me for my honesty. But long story short, one of the projects that we had to do as a class was basically a 30-minute videotaped piece. And what we came up with was a kind of a wacky soap opera situation. There was a soap opera about a soap company. So... And yeah, we went there. So we were trying to think of things to, spice it up and everything. And I came up with a soundtrack. I'll have to see if I still have the mod files and everything. But the soundtrack I came up with using Octamed, actually. And when we did the final post-production on it, what I did was I took I loaded up Octamed on the Amiga 2000 in the TV studio. and piped the Amiga's audio outputs into the mixing board that was connected to the videotape and everything, and I mixed it that way. Anyway, at the end of the year, the TV and radio station at the college would have an awards banquet. The radio station would give various awards. I won, by the way, John, you'll especially like this one. For the radio station, I won Best Specialty Show, and my specialty show was basically 2 hours every Monday night of really obscure Beach Boys music. So I was shocked that I beat out 19 other shows for that. But I also won an award from the TV station for Best Original Score. And they had told me that was the first time they had ever done that because I had necessitated that. And people really liked the score. And it was all because of Octamed. So there you have it. God, I have a lot of good memories, about the Amiga, a lot of expensive memories about the Amiga, which is why I'm no longer really in the Amiga community, but I love hearing you guys talk about it. So thank you, Aaron and John, for doing your show. Yeah, I remember other Amiga memories, like say when my wife and I got together and I moved in with her. We had a 1-bedroom apartment and not a lot of room, so my Amiga was set up on our kitchen table. That was especially great when I upgraded to an Amiga 4000 and had this, well, for what an Amiga was, a behemoth computer just sitting right there in the kitchen. Yeah, just try eating around that thing. It's kind of an interesting experience, but so anyway, I'm not gonna bogart too much of your time, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. Again, Aaron and John, thank you so much for the Amigos podcast, and back to you.
Next up, we've got a memory from Rob Flack O'Hara.
My buddy Justin and I both owned Commodore 64 computers. We called the same BBSs, we played the same games, and we constantly called and talked to each other about Commodore 64 related stuff. And I remember the time that he called me and said that he had got rid of his Commodore 64 and upgraded to an Amiga. Now, this was at the end of what most people would consider to be the Commodore 64's lifespan. This was in the early 1990s. So by then, most people were starting to migrate to 16-bit computers. I had hung on to the Commodore longer than a lot of my friends did. So Justin got an Amiga for Christmas, and I remember shortly after Christmas driving over to his house to check it out, and there were a lot of simple things that the Amiga could do that were mind-blowing compared to what the Commodore 64 could do. I remember him showing me the Amiga Juggler demo, which I had seen on television and in magazines, but seeing it in real life in person on a monitor just really looked amazing. And even the Amiga bouncing ball, with the sound effects and the rotating ball looked really cool. But what I really remember about that trip was the game Walker. I think you guys have talked about Walker on the podcast before, and if you haven't seen Walker, it's a game where it's a very simple game with a scrolling, I guess you would call it a mech, a two-leg walker. It looked like a AT-ST from Star Wars, if you're familiar with that, or Ed 209 maybe from Robocod. And the game is very simple. You scrolled across the screen, you walked, you used either the keyboard or the joystick to move the robot across the screen, and then you used the mouse for the targeting system to shoot. And I've gone back and looked at footage of this game on YouTube, and it doesn't really look that amazing today, obviously, compared to modern graphics and things like that. But boy, at that time, that was really cool. And I remember he just had the demo for this game, so it must have just been the first version, or maybe it was time limited, something I don't remember. But I do remember we spent a lot of time playing that. That is one of the first games I remember that required two hands, controlling the walker with one hand and using the mouse to shoot. Of course, later on with first-person shooters and things like Doom, when those definitely took off and became popular, that two-hand control system we all had to master if we wanted to play those types of games. But Walker is the first one I remember that required both hands like that at the same time. And just the graphics, the 3D type modeling that was on the actual ship. And of course you had all this beautiful parallax scrolling going on as the walker moved over, and all the little details of the little things you would shoot, and people running around and explosions. I just remember thinking that compared to the 8-bit computer games that I had grown up playing, that this was definitely a huge step forward in graphics. Maybe not in gameplay depth per se, but just seeing it seemed very exciting. And based on that game, I just knew that there were going to be great games coming out for the next generation of 16-bit computers. So when I think about the Amiga and Christmas, that's what I think about. That trip where I drove out to my buddy Justin's house to see his new computer system and some of the new games that he had acquired. So anyway, to all the Amigos listeners and Sprite Castle fans and everybody else out there who supports these old computer systems, I hope you have a great holiday, and I hope that you are still enjoying these old computers around the holidays.
And our final memory comes from Jonas from O'Brien's Retro and Vintage. He wrote this one in, so I'll read it. Christmas 1995. I was the proud owner of Amiga 1200 with a whopping 120 megabyte hard drive. I used the computer for everything, like writing texts, playing games, listening to mod files, some simple programming and graphics, watching demos, etc. It was hooked up to an old but working TV set. Christmas morning I checked if Santa had visited us, and apparently he had, since the Christmas stockings hang on the door. In the stockings were an issue of my favorite magazine, See You Amiga. I was very happy since it came with cover discs and lots of stuff to read. I even loved reading the adverts for hardware and sucking in all the information about them. Later that day we visited my grandparents and celebrated Christmas with them. As is the tradition here in Norway, all presents are opened after Christmas dinner in the evening. I don't remember many of the gifts, but when everyone had unwrapped their presents, there was one big present left. Everyone said it was for my grandfather, but suddenly that was not true. It was for me. I couldn't believe it and became excited. I unwrapped it, and guess what? It was a brand new 1438S monitor from Amiga Technologies. I was so happy, as I was used to an old eyesore TV set. It was the best Christmas ever. When we got home, I was allowed to hook it up and try it out before bed, and it was so great. The colors, the stereo sound. First thing I tried was a demo of Z-Wolf 2. My parents told me that they'd ordered the monitor from Masters, an Amiga dealer in Oslo, but there had been some problems with the delivery. The monitor was therefore sent by train the day before Christmas Eve, and my father had picked it up just in time. A Christmas miracle. All right, thanks, Jonas, for sending that in. And thank you to all of our listeners who have submitted memories, and thanks to all of you for listening. I'm going to close out this episode by myself tonight since Aaron has already left. I hope that you all have a very Merry Christmas, and we hope that 2016 is another great year for you all and for the Amigos. So, until next time, adios.